Strawman Fallacy, distorting or exaggerating an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. For example, don't fight with your friends, you want me to be at home all day. Ad hominem arguments is dismissed based on attacking the character of the person making it, rather than addressing the substance of the argument. For instance, we can't trust your opinion on climate change because you are not a scientist. Appeal to authority, relying on the opinion of an authority figure without critically evaluating their expertise or the context of their opinion. For example, as Dr. Martin said, vaccines are safe, so they must be. False dilemma occurs when only two options are presented, ignoring the possibility of other alternatives. For instance, either we cut taxes or our economy will collapse. Slippery slope, one action will lead to a series of increasingly dire consequences without sufficient evidence to support such claims. For example, if we allow same-sex marriage, next people will want to marry animals. Appeal to ignorance, the absence of evidence against a claim is taken as evidence for the claim or vice versa. For example, there's no proof that ghosts aren't real, so they must exist. Appeal to emotion involves using emotional appeals to sway opinions rather than presenting sound reasoning. For instance, if we don't take action on climate change, future generations will suffer. Bandwagon suggests that because many people believe or do something, it must be true or right. For example, everyone is switching to organic food, so it must be healthier. Red herring, when an irrelevant topic is introduced to divert attention from the original issue. For instance, yes, there are concerns about gun control, but what about mental health services? Equivocation involves using ambiguous language to deceive or evade the truth. For example, I never said I stole the money, I said I borrowed it without permission. Hasty generalization involves drawing a conclusion based on insufficient or unrepresentative evidence. For instance, I met a rude person from France, so all French people must be rude. Appeal to nature asserts that because something is natural, it is inherently good or right. For example, herbal remedies are natural, so they must be safer and more effective than pharmaceutical drugs. To Quoque occurs when someone avoids addressing criticism by turning it back on the accuser. For example, you say I shouldn't smoke because it's bad, but you eat fast food every day, so why should I listen to you? Genetic fallacy involves judging the merit or validity of an idea based on its origin rather than on its own qualities or merits. For instance, that idea came from a socialist, therefore it must be flawed. No true Scotsman, redefining a category or group to exclude specific counterexamples in order to defend a generalization. For example, no true Scotsman puts sugar in their porridge. Begging the question occurs when the conclusion of an argument is assumed in one of the premises. For example, person A, you can't trust him because he's always lying. Person B, how do you know he's always lying? Appeal to false authority involves appealing to an authority figure who lacks expertise in the relevant field. For example, as an expert, I believe we should trust my opinion, but you're expert in which field? Anecdotal fallacy, using personal anecdotes or isolated examples as evidence in an argument without considering stats or data. For example, I know someone who smoked for 50 years and lived to be 90, so smoking can't be that bad for you. Texas sharpshooter, drawing conclusions from data that has been cherry-picked or selectively presented while ignoring contradictory data. For example, the politician highlighted statistics showing a decrease in crime rates in areas where his policies were implemented, but failed to mention rising crime rates in other areas. Moving the goalposts, changing the criteria of an argument or moving the goalposts after the fact to avoid admitting defeat or to make it impossible for the opposing side to meet the new criteria. For instance, you said if I got a job, you'd stop criticizing me. Now that I have a job, you're criticizing me for not making enough money. Appeal to fear involves using fear or threat to manipulate someone's opinion or actions rather than presenting valid reasoning. For example, if you don't vote for me, our country will be overrun by crime. Appeal to flattery. In this fallacy, someone uses excessive compliments or flattery to gain favor or support, rather than relying on sound arguments. For instance, you're such a great person you can't see why my proposal is the best option. Argument from personal incredulity. The arguer finds a claim incomprehensible or difficult to understand, and therefore concludes that it must be false. For example, I can't understand how evolution could explain complex life forms, so it must not be true. Gambler's fallacy, when someone believes that future events are affected by past events, especially in random processes like gambling. For instance, I've lost the last 10 hands of poker, so I'm going to win now. Nirvana fallacy, when someone dismisses an idea or proposal because it's not perfect, even though it's an improvement over the current situation. For example, universal healthcare will never work because it won't solve every healthcare issue. Argumentum Ad Populum, when someone argues that because something is popular, it must be true or correct. For example, millions of people watch this TV show, so it must be the best. Appeal to tradition argues that something is good or right simply because it's traditional. For example, we've always hunted whales, it's part of our culture and heritage. Appeal to wealth involves assuming that someone's wealth or success makes their opinions more valid or credible. For instance, he's a billionaire businessman, so he must know how to fix the economy. False analogy. In this fallacy, an analogy is drawn between two situations that aren't sufficiently similar, leading to flawed reasoning. For example, arguing against gun control is like advocating for unregulated access to cars. Both can be dangerous if misused. Fallacy of relative privation occurs when someone dismisses a problem as unimportant because there are more serious issues to address. For instance, why worry about climate change when there are more serious issues? Appeal to spite involves rejecting an idea or proposal out of spite or dislike for the person advocating it, rather than considering its merits. For example, I won't support that policy because I can't stand the politician proposing it. Appeal to tradition assumes that something is good or right simply because it's traditional. For example, we've always celebrated this holiday with fireworks, so we shouldn't change it. Fallacy of composition, when someone assumes that what's true for one part of a whole must be true for the entire whole. For instance, each cell in the body is microscopic, so the entire body must be microscopic. Fallacy of division assumes that what's true for the whole must be true for its parts. For example, the company is profitable, so each employee must be well paid. Appeal to novelty involves arguing that something is better or more valid simply because it's new or modern. For example, this latest smartphone model must be superior because it has all the latest features. Middle ground fallacy assumes that the middle position between two extremes is always the correct one. For example, some people say we should ban all guns, while others say we should allow unrestricted access. The truth must be somewhere in between. Package deal fallacy, when multiple unrelated ideas or issues are grouped together as if they are inseparable. For instance, supporting this political candidate means endorsing all of their policies, even the ones I disagree with. Continuum fallacy, when someone argues that because there's no clear line between two extremes, they must be the same. For example, if a person loses one hair, they're not bald. If they lose two hairs, they're still not bald. Therefore, no one is ever bald. Ambiguity fallacy involves using ambiguous language to deceive or mislead. For example, the company promises unbeatable prices, but they never specify what that means. Fallacy of false cause, when someone mistakenly assumes that because one event follows another, the first event caused the second. For instance, I wore my lucky socks and then it started raining, so my socks must have caused the rain. Fallacy of reification occurs when someone treats an abstract concept as if it were a concrete thing. For example, the economy is struggling, it needs to be stimulated. Fallacy of suppressed evidence, relevant information is deliberately omitted or suppressed to bolster a particular argument. For example, the study showed that the new drug was effective, but it failed to mention the severe side effects experienced by many participants. The fallacy of false equivalence occurs when two things are compared as if they are equal, when in fact they are not. For example, comparing the severity of a cold to cancer is a false equivalence. While both are health concerns, their impact and treatment are vastly different. Chronological snobbery, when someone dismisses an idea or practice as outdated or inferior simply because it's old-fashioned. For example, we shouldn't rely on ancient philosophers' ideas, we evolved beyond that. Loaded question that contains a controversial or unjustified assumption, often leading to a biased or unwarranted conclusion. Example, have you stopped cheating on your exams, assuming the person being asked has been cheating without any evidence. Sunk cost fallacy, continuing a behavior or endeavor as a result of previously invested resources, time, money, effort, despite the likelihood of negative outcomes. Example, I will eat the expired snacks because they were so expensive. Argument from silence, drawing a conclusion based on the absence of evidence rather than the presence of evidence. Example, there's no record of John ever being late to work, so he must be the most punctual person in the office. Definition, incorrectly assuming that something must conform to a rigid definition in order to be valid. You can't call it art if it doesn't fit into the traditional definitions of painting or sculpture.